developed by the International Telecommunication Union, the United Nations Agency for Digital Technologies, in partnership with over 50 UN agencies, and co-convened with Switzerland. The mission of AI for Good is to unlock AI's potential to serve humanity. As a multi-stakeholder platform, AI for Good advances solutions, standards, and skills. In today's AI for Good event, we are counting on you to use the live video wall feature to ask questions and post comments to help create an engaging session. Boost your AI skills and elevate your career with the AI for Good Discovery Badge. Receive verified digital credentials that recognize your engagement in cutting-edge sessions, exploring how AI is being used to tackle global challenges. To see if a session is eligible, look for the blue badge banner on the right side of the video interface that activates at the end of each live session. Share your badge on LinkedIn and across your professional profiles, and check the AI for Good events webpage for upcoming eligible online sessions. Discovery Badge sessions are part of the AI Skills Coalition, ITU's global initiative to strengthen credible AI learning pathways and expand access to high-quality, trustworthy AI knowledge worldwide. We encourage you to stay until the end to chat, connect, ask questions, and network with our distinguished facilitators and world-class AI experts in the neural network. It is now time to kick off the session and welcome our first speaker. The floor is yours.
All right, awesome. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and welcome to this webinar, jointly organized by the ITU, the UNDP, and the AI Hub for Sustainable Development. My name is Craig Ramlal. I am the Executive Director of the Artificial Intelligence Innovation Center at the University of the West Indies in the Caribbean, and separately, I am the Chair of the Caribbean AI Task Force. Today's discussion focuses on the responsible diffusion of AI in low and middle income countries and small island developing states. As AI systems are increasingly integrated into digital public infrastructure, service delivery, and private sector operations, these contexts reveal important stress points, where systems may fail to perform reliably, where safeguards may be insufficient, and where responsibility across the AI lifecycle may remain a bit unclear. For many countries that are primary adopters rather than builders of AI, strengthening trust, safety, and context-aware governance is essential to enabling sustainable adoption and preventing new vulnerabilities from being introduced into already complex public and private systems. So the objectives of this session is as follows. What we would like to do would be to examine the main challenges and opportunities facing LMICs and SIDs at small island developing states and the wider global south in responsibly procuring, deploying, and scaling AI. We will consider issues such as linguistic inequality, limited digitized data, model performance, safety and governance, while identifying practical pathways to move beyond pilots. We will look at building trust, strengthening institutional readiness, and support AI adoption for development impact. To bridge this gap between responsible AI principles and practical implementation, we will now turn to our panelists. They will bring perspectives from AI governance, innovation, safety research, strategy, and national AI policy. With us today, we have Rachel Adams, CEO of the Center for AI Governance, Kato Stephen Mubiru, CEO and co-founder of Crane AI Labs and an AI for Sustainable Development innovator, Edward Yee, Head of Strategy and Growth at Far.ai, and finally, Mona Nabil Demaidi, I hope I got that name right, developer of the Palestinian AI National Strategy and Vice President for AI at Arab American University, Palestine. Before we move into our moderated discussion, highly anticipated, I would like to invite each panelist to offer brief introductory remarks. I ask each of you to take a few minutes to introduce yourselves, briefly describe the perspective you bring to this conversation, and highlight one issue you see as a central responsibility for the diffusion of AI. So let's first begin with Kato. May I first invite you to begin?
Yes, thank you, Craig. Thank you to the ITU, the UNDP, and the AI Hub for this sustainable development for this session. My name is Kato Stephen Mwiru, co-founder of Crane AI Labs with my co-founder Bakonga Bronson. This session touches the pain point of what Crane AI Labs works on, which is AI for low resource settings, and which is mainly applicable in low middle income countries. For us, the issue we are facing is the lack of a digital representation of many languages, which then turns into lack of enough benchmarks and evaluation for AI safety for low middle income countries. So we work to bridge that gap by developing benchmarks and developing data sets and models that work in these settings for the global south and for Africa, where we come from. So that is my introduction.
Great. I think you're on mute. Great. I think you were on mute.
My bad. Edward, if you may please continue.
100%. Thanks a lot, Greg. So a little about me. I came from AI safety from financial inclusion. And for most of my career, I've tried to make traditional systems a bit more just. In Lebanon, there's been hyperinflation for many years. And I've built a fintech so that savers can actually hold their money in hard currencies from a digital phone instead of flying to Switzerland or having to squirrel their dollars under their mattresses or in shoe boxes. In Delhi, I built an impact fund so that lenders can actually borrow. We do this by putting up guarantees so people like single mothers could actually get access to credit. And what I saw from all those years is that technology can make an incredible difference in making systems a lot more just, equal, and beneficial for humanity. But this only happens when these systems and this technology is put to good use and built well. The same logic can very much run in reverse, and we've seen a lot of harms from advanced technologies. These consequences when it comes to AI have already killed people. OpenAI has disclosed more than 1 million people every week express suicidal intent to ChatGPT. Deepfakes have already influenced elections across Slovakia as well as Ireland. And AI-assisted scamming is going through the roof around the world and more so in Southeast Asia than anywhere else. That's why I pivoted into AI safety to help reduce the harms of some of the most advanced AI systems in the world. And frankly, unfortunately, I think for people in this room, it is these technologies which will impact LMICs the most. These harms very much travel the fastest and the furthest, where we have the least safeguards. And like it or not, that is in LMICs today. Whether if you have a frontier model deployed in San Francisco, it's deployed immediately across Dhaka, Dar es Salaam, La Paz, everywhere, really. And the technology arrives first. People, regulators, safeguards come very much later. And unfortunately, the only safeguards which we have today are developed by machine learning PhDs living in San Francisco, London, Hangzhou, or Singapore. I must say though, like many of these researchers are with us. So, but we're trying to solve the problem. We're trying to expand so that we can actually take into account the perspectives and the impacts on the global population. But I think if nothing else, it shows AI safety is not a luxury. It's not a luxury for LMICs to have. It's almost the first thing and it's a precondition for us to actually think about sustainable development going forward. Because without safety and without thinking about these guardrails, the benefits of AI really doesn't scale. And so that's why I would love to talk a bit more about how AI has to be built together with LMICs as well as small states today.
Thank you so much, Edward. I really do appreciate this perspective on AI safety. Next on the list, Mona, can you please give us your remarks?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Greg. It's an honor to be with all of you, and thank you so much for the invitation. Just to give a quick background, so I've been highly involved in developing the AI national strategy in Palestine. I've also worked on applying the UNESCO readiness assessment methodology, and recently I finalized working on the AI in higher education policy. And one thing that keeps coming out is the lack of governance across all of these sectors. So we speak about upskilling, we speak about AI adoption across education, private sector, the entrepreneurship ecosystem, but governance is still not there. And when we start talking about trust and safety, even governance in terms of having laws and regulations, we're still missing all of that. So that's one thing I want to shed the light on. The other thing that I want to shed the light on is the lack of, I'll say, open data sets, which we could use. And I'm not saying that there's no trials, and I could speak in Palestinian context and the global south. So there are some data sets, but they're not actually reliable or rich in terms of context, so that we could apply it across multidimensional sectors. And the last thing I want also to emphasize is the bias in terms of capturing the culture, language, and all of that. So Arabic language, for example, it's well spoken across the Middle East. But if we look at the large language models now, it's not that much represented, and it even consumes more power actually to prompt in these large language models using the Arabic language. So again, where are we going in terms of actually regulating all of this? I'll stop here, Greg. I'm looking forward for the discussion. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Thank you very much. Let's now move on to Rachel, please. Can we have your 2-minute intervention?
Thank you so much, Craig, and it's such a pleasure to be here with all of you today. It's a real honor. I lead the Global Center on AI Governance, which is a South African-based think tank that has been doing research around the kind of governance mechanisms we need to ensure that AI serves just and equitable futures, particularly across the African continent and other parts of the so-called global south. And I think in terms of many of the issues that we're looking at today, this is the global south, LMICs, and particularly kind of very low resource contexts around the world is where we see AI systems kind of being stress tested. The use of AI models, the diffusion of these models in these contexts show us where they fail linguistically. It shows us where institutional safeguards are not strong enough, where procurement systems need to be updated, and how quickly issues like public trust can arise. And I think on the kind of converse side of that, there are also the sites of really, really interesting innovation, which I think the world can learn from, because resources are constrained governments and other kinds of government supporting actors like research centers and other kinds of innovators. They're thinking very pragmatically about what proportional governance looks like in these contexts. The public value of these technologies is much more at the forefront of their use and diffusion, and what trustworthy deployment looks like in contexts outside the West. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for the interventions from our panelists. It's quite interesting, the different perspectives that we took. We are talking about data sets, benchmarks, and biases, depending on the region. We are talking about AI safety, AI governance, and of course, operating these systems in low resource contexts. I quite like that last statement, operating in low resource contexts. So I think that let's start our first round of questions. So the first question I have, and of course, keeping in line with this low resource context, is that limitation can often be a mother of innovation. So what is something context-specific or a constraint that currently shapes how you approach AI solutions and deployment in practice differently in your country? And maybe let's start with Keto with this one. And of course, there's some follow-up questions after this, but maybe we can start with Keto. Is that okay?
Yes. The unique position that we at Crane AI Labs have is we are stress testing these models in low resource settings as much. So Crane AI Labs is the only African partner that DeepMind has given access to some of these models earlier. And we have been, for example, doing pilots on models for healthcare in low resource settings. This week, most of the team is in the villages The footage will be coming out soon. As you're developing, you realize the issues such as connectivity, to lack of data sets to capture these health guidelines for example, I'm in Uganda right now for some districts, and healthcare workers mentioned these issues that we need something that works offline, probably understands the guidelines of the government or local language if you can manage. So those 3 things, data sets being not enough, connectivity being an issue, and also the benchmarks. So for us, we have a benchmark we developed. I believe it's the only benchmark that exists in the International AI Safety Framework adopted by the UK government. And then we've expanded it for healthcare on this pilot we are doing, and also for education. But you have to know that you have to collect data, break it down, and it is not that easy. Even the skill sets for you to do that is not easy. You need to train. So as I mentioned, connectivity, training, having those skills, the benchmarks, then the data sets that represent these languages in these areas where you want to stress test these models and provide feedback to the people who are at the frontier edge. We talk to the directors of DeepMind products and all that, and we get the feedback. We tell them, please, if you're building, this is how things are on this side. Your models may not work. The phones that people are using are 4 GB, 8 GB, 3 GB. Please reduce, quantize your models, and also think about this benchmark. So yeah, that is.
Yeah, thank you for that. That is quite interesting. I think let's follow up on that. And maybe Edward, I can ask you this question. What can bigger states learn from smaller states when it comes to improving practical pathways to safer and more trustworthy AI diffusion? I also want to say that this is an open dialogue. If anyone wants to make an intervention, any of the panelists want to make an intervention, please go ahead, raise your hand. So Ed, can I ask you this
100%.
question? Yeah, good.
Yes, yeah, we'd love a conversation as well. But maybe I'll start this off with a story, right? Last year, my team at FAST, so the work we do spans quite a bit of AI safety, technical AI safety. But one of the key things which we do is we work together with frontier labs around the world, most of the leading ones, to actually do pre-deployment testing of their models. This means that we get access to the models beforehand, we test them, and then we give it back to them, and we work with them to build in safeguards. Today, most of the leading models have our safeguards built into them because of the work we've done. So last year, what we found was that as we were working with one of the major frontier AI models, we managed to find a universal jailbreak. So what this means is that we could elicit any harmful response we wanted from these models. And we found this in about 80 hours or so. This is despite the lab previously reporting that they had over 3,000 hours of expert red teaming really done on it, both in-house and external. And still the defenses fail. Today, we constantly continue to find vulnerabilities in these models and problems in these models. And I think maybe to come back to the earlier question, right? The reason we found these vulnerabilities is not that we were further from the technology. Frankly, like my team is very much embedded in the Bay Area, but also globally in many of the tech hubs where they develop these models. But it's because we really approached it from a very different perspective and question. It's not about how do we build these models or ship it or get it, to as much people or as high utilization as possible. It's really around what can we get this model to do for people, and what are the risks and harms which it does to them potentially. What are the areas of misuse? And I think what's quite interesting, connecting it to your question, is that this lens is basically the same lens which smaller states and LMICs have to bring and or take on naturally. Because they're not building at a frontier, the first question to them is not whether or not they have to build this technology or what kind of technology they should build. That's not a question they can answer. Instead, the question which which is thrust upon them is, how can we get this technology to benefit their people? How do we help minimize the risk of this technology? And I think this surfaces a bigger problem on how the field has been operating. Basically, bigger states, think the US, China, maybe even Europe, right? They have the frontier labs. Their immediate thought is, okay, let's build first, and we ask questions later, right? Questions like guardrails, risks, and all of that comes later. But smaller states, they don't operate this way because they can't operate this way. They have really no choice but to ask the first question. Ask questions first. What does this model do? How does it fail? What liabilities does it cause my people and harms? And is there anything which I should demand before deploying it? Now, there is a question around lack of state capacity and all of that. But really, I think that sequence around thinking about the risk and safety first, and then deployment second, is what the overall field really needs to adopt. And that's what bigger states can really learn from smaller states, right? It's really starting from these questions which smaller states were basically forced to adopt. But because of that, some smaller states have really charged ahead in actually thinking about guardrails, safety at the grassroots level, and implement and the actual benefit on its populations. So I think there's lots to be learned there.
Awesome. So I see in the answers we have looking at local models, thinking about training capacity, but also these models that we are importing, they do have structural vulnerabilities based on the data that they're being trained on. And so possibly looking at thinking about risk and safety first, then building out your models might be beneficial for the small island states. Do we have anyone wants to respond to that? Any of the other panelists wants to make an intervention here?
And Greg, maybe very fast, and I do agree with what actually was stated by Edward. And this is one of the main struggles we're having. We're much more using the AI technology rather than actually being part of the governing aspect of it. So if the big states could actually do that for us, I think that would be very helpful. Because again, even adopting it, it's very costly for states such as Palestine and many states in the global south.
Well, fantastic. And I want to stay with you a little bit here, Mona, because you said something very interesting, which is the Arabic language. Because of the, I guess, with the amount of tokens that is in there, it costs more for the prompting to happen. So the question I have for you is that how can we then ensure that AI diffusion, the integration of AI into the public service systems as we are using these languages in the sense, is sustainable for the long term and representative of local linguistic diversity and demographics to improve AI accuracy, trust, and contextual awareness. This is quite a mouthful, especially to avoid systemic discrimination or injustice in public services. Yeah.
Yeah, I would start Greek again, especially with the language itself. I think this is one of the main challenges we're currently having. First, the language itself is a struggle because the models, they're not trained, for example, on Arabic. And most of the people are using actually, they're prompting in Arabic and they're not aware with what's actually happening behind the scenes. So one way is to start enriching these large language models. And we've been seeing, by the way, several Arab states who started working on that. So we have Saudi Arabia, now they have their own large language model, which they fed it with a huge amount of Arabic data. We have also UAE, Qatar. So we're seeing that kind of movement in the Arab state. But I do believe countries like Palestine should start looking at plugging themselves into these large language models instead of actually going back towards using the models which were already developed in the US or China or many other countries. So this is one way to look at it. In terms of public services, I think one of the main challenges, in addition to the bias, is that most of these models are not even context aware. So they don't actually understand the real problems and real issues we're facing on a daily basis as Palestinians in terms of services we want. They don't actually like reply to our cultural sensitivities from where we're coming, how we're interacting with these models. And I think what adds on the top of that is also there is no human supervision on how these tools are used. And what I want to mention is that during my studies that I've been doing with the ecosystem, regardless like government, private sector, education, the lack of awareness and understanding how the data is processed and used by these models is not there yet. So if we're talking about public services, we have to ensure that we have governmental staff or experts who are able and capable to actually supervise the whole process and who are able and capable to justify why the outputs are coming the way they are. And adding on the top of that, we need people who could also add their, I'll say, expertise in terms of laws and regulation. As I mentioned at my opening, data privacy and protection law, we still don't have that yet. So how will I actually start launching public services, AI-powered public services, if I can't actually justify the output and I can't hold anyone accountable? So accountability and responsibility also comes out of that. So what I want to say in other words, we can't afford actually enriching the models. It's very expensive on us. First, It's expensive in time, it's expensive in money, it's expensive in power. And to add on the top of that, we don't have the capacity to actually get the hardware in which we could run the AI models, for example, within the Brazilian context. So this is also another struggle. One way is to start that kind of big collaboration with big countries, and this is why I actually agree 100% with Edward. This could be one of the ways to look forward towards such collaboration. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. So I see, okay, so many challenges, but one way out of this is collaboration with the frontier, with the larger countries who have the frontier labs so that we can enrich their data sets with that. Do we have anyone else wants to make a contribution to this particular question?
Maybe I could just jump in. Oh, okay. Kato, go ahead.
Yes, one additional point is you also have to just work with the current setting that exists. So if you wait for the labs to come to you to collaborate, sometimes you lag behind. So a country has to have its existing developers or few researchers push with the existing devices. If you have few GPUs, if you have few data sets, develop something. That thing may span up other developers from neighboring countries or communities. I've seen it many times through the AI hub where we are in the UNDP, where we start something on voice AI and another startup picks it up. But it's not like they're talented, but they will learn from the small step you've made and you push them. So I would differentiate from actually waiting and putting all the guardrails to say the technology will leave you. If you look at cloud right now, Claude, it's too good, right? So if you deploy Claude onto a country, when it's too advanced, you won't give a country's economy a chance to adapt. So that country has to already have something knowing what AI is, what a neural network is, or at least have a few models, even if they're doing poorly, but at least going through the process and know the resources that are needed to develop without waiting for some things to be put in place. That is how we started. Then later on, we developed these safeguards, guardrails, and we developed these relationships with NVIDIA, with Microsoft, with Google. But after we had an artifact to show them that, I think you should look at these areas like this. This is how we are doing it. When you don't have that, then from countries in Africa, you can't really get messages from Google responding to you if you have nothing to show them. That's how I've seen it. For many, many developers I've recommended, if there is nothing they have developed, it's hard for the other team to relate or even help them or collaborate on anything.
Well, thank you very much for that. That is quite interesting. You're saying that there needs to be a bit of experimentation in the country first, so that they can have that learnings internally to do so. Edward, I think you wanted to make a response here. Do you still want to? Yes? No? Okay.
Oh, no, it's okay. Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I know we've got
Okay,
more questions to go.
Thank you. Okay. Rachel, you've been quite silent. So this question is for you. In most of your countries, the rate of AI adoption outpaces AI development. So what is the greatest challenge you see in AI procurement policies and practices in small states and low and middle income countries?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Craig. And I think one of the critical challenges, perhaps one of the biggest challenges we face, is a lack of meaningful governance mechanisms to govern how we are procuring these systems and to safeguard their use for our societies. So we ran a study called the Global Index on Responsible AI, and the second edition of this study will be published and launched at the AI for Good Summit in July. It measures responsible AI governance efforts across 135 countries globally. We have most of the Caribbean covered, the large majority of Africa, Asia, Latin America, and other parts of the world. So it's the most globally representative study on what governments are doing and the implementation gap between what governments are intending to do and what they're actually doing. And I think with regards to the kind of procurement question, this is a very live issue currently in South Africa because South Africa is currently negotiating some major investments from big tech into AI infrastructure. Many countries around the world are in the same position. And Last week, we had a draft AI policy that was published that would have governed precisely these kinds of negotiations. But over the weekend, this policy, which was a draft policy, but it was withdrawn because it was found to have fictitious AI generated references in it. And I've published a piece discussing this, but aside from the fact that the AI generated references undermines the credibility of this policy, the kind of bigger issue is that we do not have a governance framework that will govern and set terms for public procurement of AI in ways that are beneficial to South Africa and similar to many other countries around the world. So I think the governance gap is a really, really critical and increasingly urgent one. The other one I see is around governance mechanisms that are specific for AI safety. And I think because countries across the so-called global south have been so focused on diffusion and so focused on the positive use cases of this technology, the questions around the ways in which they can be misused in these contexts have been really deprioritized. There is some very interesting research that will shortly come out from a researcher that's now affiliated with the University of Cambridge on the use of AI by terrorist groups in West Africa. I think this will be a very, very interesting study to help us better understand what's happening. And then there was also a really fantastic piece of work that was published by Mino Health Labs, which is an AI company that's based in Accra in Ghana that develops health technologies using large language models. And effectively, they took off the safeguards, the technical kind of parameters to stop people kind of jailbreaking this technology and using it for destructive means. They took off those limitations and found that the model was capable of identifying unique bioagents local to the area that could be used to create bioweapons. So I think some of these kinds of issues feel to me like they're really significantly falling out of what feels like the main governance questions we're looking at across the global south. And I think it's going to be really problematic if we don't try and get on top of some of these very serious risks, as well as thinking proactively about how beneficial this technology can be for accelerating access to critical services.
So I think, what you have discussed is, and what resonates with is really the misuse of AI. But then we need to, every country needs to procure AI or develop AI in some sense. So then in what ways do you see that the procurement practices in the countries need to change to improve AI trust if we are seeing these very, very bad misuses of AI systems, especially for terrorist organizations and so on?
Yeah, thank you, Craig. I mean, I think there's a couple of issues. One is that our officers that are managing procurement processes are not always fully equipped with the kinds of skills they need to be able to assess the capabilities of these models for contexts outside of the West, and particularly contexts where these technologies will be used with and in different linguistic contexts. The global benchmarks that we have for measuring the capabilities of these contexts are not culturally and contextually appropriate in many parts of the world. So there is a kind of scientific lag, and then there's the policy lag as well. The other part that's connected to this is I think very often procurement or emerging procurement frameworks, and the problem is we have procurement frameworks that are not AI specific at all. But the procurement frameworks that are emerging that are AI specific are very focused on the functionality of these systems, assessing how well they will perform rather than the degree to which the accountability measures that will be put in place surrounding the deployment of these models. when they fail, who are we responsible when the public sector is using them? I'm going to again quickly refer to case law in South Africa that I think is really important here. And it was when a technology company, now it wasn't AI, but a technology company was used to help in the deployment of social grants to those across South Africa who have social grants, which is well over half of the population. And at one point, the company failed to deliver these social grants. And a case law, it was a very long process, that said, constitutionally, people have a right of access to social security. And that right must be delivered, whether it's by a private sector actor, this technology company that was brought on, or a public sector actor. It is not just the state that is responsible for the delivery of rights. It's any party that has been procured or appointed to serve in the delivery of those rights. So I think those are the kinds of frameworks that we will need to have in place for when AI systems are at scale deployed in the public sector, particularly for the delivery of critical basic services.
Oh, fantastic. Do we have any follow-ups on that response? No, I guess not. Okay, I find it to be quite interesting, especially at scale, and the type of misuse that will happen at scale, especially without any kind of accountability or governance mechanisms in place. Okay, let's move on to the next question. And this one would be for Mona. In your countries, is data sovereignty a priority or even viewed as possible with AI, particularly when using open weights models to prevent exposure of sensitive citizen information? Let's start with that.
Yeah, definitely great. Yeah, this is one of actually the main priorities of the current government now, that we've been talking about. So sovereignty is becoming the thing. We're discussing it in most of our national forums and international forums as well. However, we still lack the capacity and capability to actually implement that. In other words, the way that we're now protecting our data, we're actually enforcing most of the public services to be on our local servers. And that's how we're looking at it. And unfortunately, that's not sustainable. There is a huge push towards having duplicate data centers. For example, this is one of the approaches that Palestine was following, is that we have a data center in UK and another one in Jordan, in which we're trying kind of protect our data. But again, that's not actually guaranteeing the sovereignty. One of the ideas I've been trying to push for, starting from last year, is the data embassy concept. How could we, given the fact that, again, we don't have laws and regulations, governance is still not there, how could we actually ensure that we can protect the data and protect the consumers of our data? And data embassy came as an idea last year. It is proposed. I know in Africa, and I would love actually to hear more about that. It's already it already took place at some stages. So this is something we're now trying to work around and push. But we still honestly didn't start the implementation. We're much more talking about it. And the reason I'm talking about that, because especially with the current also circumstances, this is becoming the thing that we're looking forward to have and achieve, and maybe also to govern it via the international law if we could decide that that embassy is going to be somewhere in Europe. So again, this is something that I also would love to hear my colleagues commenting on. Thank you, Craig.
Yes, it's interesting. I really want to know from the other regions as well if it's quite important to keep your data onshore where you are. Maybe Edward, can you, and maybe Rachel, you as well, kind of come in and maybe Kato, you as well. What do you guys do?
100%. I think on the data bit and national strategy and thinking about sovereign AI, I'll leave it to the other experts in the room. I do less work on the geopolitical front. But perhaps one thing which I want to flag is that I think open weight models becomes a huge draw for many governments, because you can keep it on your own servers, you can train it on your own data, you can fine tune it. There's a lot of things you can do to help make it to some extent yours and to ensure some level of security. There are a lot of benefits to it. But I think the other counterpoint to that when thinking about open weight models are that, there's a fairly hard trade-off here. Open weight models have, at least at this current point in time, a fraction of the guardrails and the safeguards which proprietary models have today. So I can give an example. DeepSeek v4 came out last Friday. Within a day, in fact, within 2.5 hours, we found 3 universal jailbreaks for DeepSeek v4. And that might sound easy to find, but in proprietary models, it's really difficult to find universal jailbreaks. And Anthropic was thousands of hours to find one, for example. And this was found basically in day, and wasn't particularly complex. So while there's some model level refusal training in there, everything else which you have in defense in depth stack. So maybe some explanation for defense in depth. Modern LLMs, how people put in mitigation defenses is that they figure out how to put multiple layers of defense, everything from input filters to model refusal training, reasoning monitoring, kind of output filters and all of that. I won't go into the technical side of things, but basically everything is stripped off when you're talking about an open weight model, because you don't have those safeguards in place. And you don't even have to strip it to the extent which Rachel mentioned, where you use the obliterated model, for example. What this means is that when a country chooses sovereignty, when they choose to use open weight models on their own servers or in public use, it inherits that safety burden, which is otherwise, in many cases, protected by the proprietary models today. And so when a country actually picks open weight models, they have to start thinking about what does our mitigation stack look like? How do we think about independent evaluation, testing, red teaming capacity? How do we make sure that it's really at the kind of level which we want to? How do we make sure that it considers MCML issues or multicultural, multilingual issues? And how do we actually find the domestic capacity to build these guardrails and defense in depth stacks in place? And so part of that is the burden on the country. Part of that is also thinking about beyond procurement policies, what other levers, and there are many levers which governments have when actually regulating AI in their borders. Even if you're a small state, even if maybe it's a fox pass, but are not geopolitically that as relevant or powerful, right? You can have disclosure standards for open weight releases, so that this way, like companies or countries can actually have a certain baseline amount of information to work from. So just thinking about data sovereignty itself is kind of not the full picture. You have to think about the safety associated with it. And in many cases, you're in-housing that safety by picking open weight models. Yeah.
I do quite find this particular topic very interesting because we are talking about diffusion, which has access, but you are quite right. Safety is a big part of it. I really want to hear from the other regions as well. Maybe Kato, let's start with you on this particular topic. Just give us a sense of preventing exposure to sensitive citizen information. Do you house your data on premise, or how do you guys approach open weight models and so on?
So in one of the earlier discussions, I mentioned working with existing infrastructure. For us, we don't need user data for anything, honestly, because in Africa, user data doesn't have any monetization value, and the laws are different per region. So collecting it, honestly, puts a lot of burden onto any startup wanting to venture into space. So what we do is we quantize models to run on the phone, and then make sure that you don't need the internet to get the responses or anything. That puts burden on some apps. At least the more you quantize, if you quantize a model that has parameters of 1 billion or 230 million, a Gemma model, for example, or an Nemotron model from NVIDIA, or a Cohere AI model, you then don't need to, first of all, collect data. You don't need to host it anywhere. You just need a device that can run that. So that is the approach we are currently running. We don't have any API endpoint. We do what we call on-device small language model deployment in all our work, and it's cost effective. It follows all regulations because the data doesn't leave the user, and all users are happy. Funny thing, you find person in the village doesn't really understand about AI much, says, oh, it responds in my language. But then when you tell them, put it in flight mode, it works. That's the happiness you always see genuine. If it's a farmer, a teacher, they like that. They're like, wow, I don't need data, I don't need internet, my information doesn't go. And that's where the magic is for us. And that's what we are digging down on and doing. So that is how we handle that part.
Well, that's quite interesting.
Maybe I'd
Can-
say this,
Sure.
right? Like, I think that's really cool, and I think that's absolutely needed. But also, these aren't frontier capabilities, which we're talking about. You're looking at 1 billion parameter model when, today 1 trillion just came out with DeepSeek, right? And so, like, that kind of capability difference is just night and day as well. And I think there comes a point in time, I think it's fairly far away, but at least for at the grassroots level, when those capabilities come down to the grassroots level, and that's when you start to see real dangers. And that's the kind of dangers which I think I was alluding to, rather than a 1 billion parameter model, which is much smaller. Yeah.
So, okay. And I guess to round it off, Rachel, I mean, this is an out of the way question here. I think the discussion we've been having so far is one of data sovereignty, that the data remains on premise. I think what Cato is saying is that for narrow intelligence right now, which is what the nations, what they're using it for, they can build models internally and they can use them at the consumer level. But what Ed is saying is that, well, there are frontier models that has general intelligence, and so the data we cannot host them in our countries. Is that correct? So then the data then moves to another territory. No?
Oh no, I meant it cannot be hosted on a mobile phone.
Yes. Yes, it cannot be hosted on a mobile phone. And at the
But it
same
can be
time,
hosted in data centers.
but
In
to your argument on the frontier models, SIDS
so
and LMICs wouldn't have frontier models, right?
no, they can host open weight frontier models. What I'm saying is, Cato's example is an individual, let's say, small plotholder farmer hosting it on their phone. They can't do that. But they can, if you have a data center built in Kenya, you can host it fairly easily.
Okay, so let me ask you a follow-up question then. Do you think
So
that open weight
I
frontier
wanted
models?
to add something
Go ahead,
small.
go ahead. Yeah.
I wanted to add on something small. Now, I think Rachel will also loop in. If you're on the continent, you know that you can't build a data center for AI currently because of power and the restrictions on buying these equipments. Our team is the only first team to buy the DGX to Africa, but we are in the inception program. So it is actually really hard to even procure these equipment if you're an African currently. Because for us, we had to go through multiple steps to bring it. So yes, you may see it at the picture. Yes, African governments would want to have frontier models, but the resources these models require. Currently, Africans are already dealing with existing data centers, overtaking electricity, energy. So the need forces you to go on the phone, whether you like it or not. I know many startups that are burning money and they are not making money because they're trying to do that model of data center, which currently is not applying well on the continent. And that's why when we fed back to DeepMind, you see Gemma 4. Gemma 4 is multimodal and is supposed to run agentic AI on the phone. If DeepMind is listening and changing the direction of its open models to make sure they run on the phone and provide agentic devices, that means they want to cover all the market. They've realized there is a gap. So that is the way, that's where I come from. Because the AI Hub has many startups, 130, and we already see the same issues on the continent. Whether you're in Tunisia, Nigeria, East Africa, South Africa, it's the same. They can't do that frontier work somehow. Even with the support of government, the financing is not yet there. It will take some time.
Edward, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I don't want to push back too much, but you don't need a data center to run, one of the open weight models. Inference cost is not, it's high, but it's not that high. It just can't run on, most people's mobile phones. You can run it on, your laptop. I run some of these open weight models on my laptop as well. And there's enough compute across even, small size governments to be able to run frontier models as well. And the question then is what comes from the risk of these open weight models when deployed? Yeah. So maybe that I'll just leave it as that, and then very happy to carry on. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. I think it's interesting because on one hand we are talking about capability and access and development and running the models. On the other hand, we're still talking about safety. We're still talking about front-end models, and maybe they're inching into a place of being misused. And I think, Edwards, that's your point, right? When you look at the front-end models, this is what is happening, right? But there's this balancing act that we have between access and safety that we need to look at, especially in the context of SIDS and LMICs, where we have resource constraint. So then here's my next question. So regulations are to protect the citizens. This is what we are talking about from these last set of conversations. So how can small states then cooperate globally to create harmonized AI safety regulations and share technical knowledge? Rachel, let me give that question to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Craig. And this has been such a fascinating discussion. I'm not a technical expert, so I feel like I'm learning a lot listening to you all. And Craig, I think, you're so well placed to really know how difficult it is for those that are from kind of periphery and marginalized kind of parts of the world to get involved in these kind of global discussions. And I think very often it's kind of framed as representation rather than ensuring that people from these parts of the world are kind of meaningfully leading and shaping the discussions and agendas. And I think there's a lot of kind of practical considerations that go into that. And I've been speaking a lot with kind of Western governments who are thinking about how do we best support kind of folks from LMICs to be represented in these debates. And it's like, well, fund their participation. Like sometimes it's really practical. Make sure that there's adequate funding and support to have teams of people from different countries around the world able to participate in all the different sessions. Because what we have in these global forums is that very well-resourced countries will go with a whole team of people that will be specialists in every single different area that there's discussions about, and will sit in these different meetings. Whereas we know that the kind of capacity to do that from other parts of the world is not the same. So there's a set of structural and very practical material questions that I think are part of this. The other point I'd say is that, I think actually there's an important recognition of just how much leadership from the Global South is going on at the moment in these spaces. And we were so thrilled to see the appointment of so many experts from across the African continent on the UN scientific panel. And these are people that have been doing leading work for many, many years. So I do think that we're doing very, very well in that regard. But the other thing I want to say is that global governance often seems to be pushing towards this kind of interoperable global framework for governing AI. And I think that is a pipe dream. I think often when you have interoperable frameworks, it means that the frameworks of the most dominant countries and the most dominant perspectives determine everything else. And we've already seen the fallout of the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation on data flows in other parts of the world. I think that AI governance is much more fragmented than we might kind of initially recognize. And that's because countries have very different priorities around the world. They have very different contexts and institutions that are doing the kind of work of protecting citizens. So often what I'm thinking about is how is AI undermining the capacity of governments to do the work that they need to do to protect and ensure the kind of flourishing of their communities and citizens and societies. And I think this is increasingly becoming the kind of critical question around sovereignty. We were talking about data sovereignty, but there's a larger question of sovereignty, which is about the power and the capacity of the state to govern in the best interests of their citizens and as duly elected officials of their citizens. And what I think I'm worried about is with the increasing power of big tech companies to shape the governance regimes in countries around the world, that fundamental sovereign capacity of states is being undermined. And I think that's something we should think about very centrally, and we need to ensure that as states participate in global governance forums, they're doing so from this very strong position of state sovereignty, rather than having to comply with a set of international laws and rules that suit one particular powerful nation.
Yeah, that's interesting, especially, I mean, we do have the Global AI Governance Dialogue that should be upcoming in July, and these international scientific panels should provide the information that feeds into that global dialogue so that we do have this consensus, we do have this common ground. And I find your intervention there quite interesting. In fact, I would like to ask another question on, what standards then? What can we look at maybe this one is for Ed. Just based on what Rachel is saying, what can we genuinely look to harmonize in terms of the technical level and what should remain local and contextual? And I say that in light of what Rachel is talking about for maybe a global harmonized interoperable framework. Yeah.
100%. Completely agree with Rachel, right? Let's fund state capacity. Let's build up the ability of regulators and governments around the world to understand the risk of these things, particularly on a local context, and give them the frameworks on how to even think about regulating this technology. And we're doing quite a bit of that actually with governments around the world, working with technocrats to really think about risk modeling, red teaming, what does certain levels and thresholds look like. But at the same time, I have my axe to grind on standards and harmonization globally and all of that. But I think there's also a case to be made that we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, where there's certain areas where harmonization does make sense. And we've seen this in the past, everything from, in pharmaceuticals, you have, FDA regulations, right, which have been a boon for the world in actually doing these expensive RCTs, to FAA certifications of airframes, to banking regulations like Basel. And they have been quite useful, even if countries take the best from these things and adapt it locally. So the question then is, what do we adapt? What do we not? And I think there are a few things that can be kind of harmonized at a technical level across the board, right? So first is kind of evaluation and testing, but not the evaluation and testing itself, but the methodologies, right? When my kind of team actually goes out, red teams these frontier models, we go through a specific process, right? We first figure out what the defensive architecture looks like, whether or not there's defenses placed, and layering of these defenses again, and how do we actually layer attacks to actually kind of penetrate each of these defenses. Then escalating how dangerous vulnerabilities are, then working together with the labs to actually improve it. Now, it doesn't really matter whether you're testing CBRN, bioweapons, like what Rachel mentioned, or you're testing cyber, or you're testing mental health. Each of them basically follows a rough method. So this is transferable, for example, and there can be standards around this. Similarly, a second thing might be disclosure standards, for example. So how much frontier labs actually need to disclose. There are model cards, everything from 200 plus pages of Anthropic to nothing for certain frontier models, particularly the open break ones, right? Can we actually harmonize some bits of what can we disclose? International financial IFRS standards, for example, was very useful in actually saying, hey, I know you might do accounting differently, there's GAAP, there's IFRS and all of that, but at least disclose these things, right? We're not telling you on how to actually manipulate the numbers or specific financial regulations, but at least disclose a certain set of things. And finally, kind of a certain amount of harmonization around recognizing findings, right? If a vulnerability comes up or if an incident, there's some incident reporting, all of that can be quite well shared around the world. And then the other things which really shouldn't be kind of like harmonized. Language is another, culture is another one. I was at the Indian AI Impact Summit, and Kalika, who's kind of helping the Indian AC get set up, was sharing a very interesting story. It's like, telling the gender of a baby is, the baby or fetus is illegal in India. But today, it's nothing stopping you from actually just taking an ultrasound and uploading in and getting that information anyway. It's just illegal for doctors to do it. So how do you actually kind of like abide by local customs and regulations? Similarly for the caste system there as well. So there are different things which can be put in place to make sure that harms are not put in play or harms are not conducted. But I think there's certain technical things which you could harmonize around the world quite well, and it's quite transferable across borders. And you, as small states, you want to be very strategic around thinking, what do I not have to in-house and then put the technical burden on ourselves? And what do I in-house because it's very important for my particular context and only I can do it?
I quite find that to be fantastic. I think that we are now at 11 a.m. where I am in EST. So I'm a bit out of time, but I really wanted to give the floor to Kato and Mona just for any other last remarks, and especially in terms of what we have discussed. We've moved from global all the way down to local. So if you can even tell us, even talk about it from the standards point of view, or even the protocols and policies and infrastructure that we would need to support these kinds of actions, that would be fantastic. And if you can do so within 10 seconds each, that would be fantastic as well. So please, Mona, you first, ladies first.
Yeah, definitely, Greg. I'll make it very fast. I do believe that global cooperation is the way forward. I'm really glad to see how the discussion also went today. I think this is something that we have to work on now, and the global dialogue could be a starting point. And I do believe we have to push to have our voices, especially the global south and low state countries, to actually be part of the conversation. I really loved what Rachel actually mentioned and stated in terms of bringing their voices on board and bringing helping them in terms of knowledge transfer since they lack the expertise. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Kato, please, last words.
Yes, as an innovator who is working in African space, I would say the approach of the AI Hub: go to the ecosystems, enable the ecosystems themselves, the young people, give them the resources and let them innovate and try build these things, and give you some results and maybe regulate what they've given you at that point. Also, to show that Africa's way of deployment is totally going to be different from other regions, because Africa has different problems, many countries, many cultures, many languages, fragmented and just unifying as time goes on. So the deployment is totally different. It might look easy maybe to put on a server, on a data center, but on ground, that is not how Africa works. Africa is totally different from what you would perceive from other regions. And it is beautiful to be here and try it yourself and say so. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I would like to close. First, I would like to thank the ITU, the UNDP, and the AI Hub for Sustainable Development for helping us put on this very wonderful panel, for getting these remarkable people together so that we can have a very good discussion. I think one of the things I want to see coming out of this panel discussion is more global south to south, or more SIDS, LMICs collaboration. And we did say that we are looking toward global cooperation. Some things I think struck out, it kind of came out to me, is that the countries need to experiment and build their own internal capacity and learnings. I think that was quite remarkable to see, because that will build our fundamental sovereign capacity of states. Other things that we need that also came out was the meaningful governance mechanisms, especially in the case of misuse of AI. And we are not looking for representation from the SIDS and LMIs. We are looking for meaningful contribution at these tables. So thank you so much. I really do appreciate the panelists for this fantastic contribution. Lastly, I want to thank the viewers here with us. We did have one question that we got in. I sneaked it in within the technical standards. We have persons viewing from Italy, US, Switzerland, UK, Brazil, Turkey, Ghana, Nepal, Mexico, Venezuela, Greece, South Africa, Germany, Philippines, Australia, Japan, Zimbabwe, and India. I think we are moving closer to that direction of global cooperation. I thank all of you for coming here and talking. So with that and with closing, I will now hand over to Anna to wrap us up.
Thank you for participating in today's AI for Good session. We hope you've learnt something new, innovative, and engaging in today's event. We now encourage you to continue the conversation on the live video wall in the neural network. Here you can ask questions, like and comment, share links, complete the poll, Connect with interesting profiles or speak one-on-one using the chat and video function. We invite you to explore the lobby, try the smart matching quiz, visit the virtual exhibits, poster boards, the e-shop, and build your personalized AI for Good program. Let's shape the future of AI for good.
Goodbye, everyone. I think